Welcome back to another episode of Everyday Endorphins, a mental health podcast focused on the importance of finding joy and happiness in daily living. I'm your host, Stella Stephanopoulos, and this week I had the pleasure of getting to talk about all things related to women's health and hormonal health with the co-founders of Two Moons. Two Moons is a supplement company that is focused on seed cycling. And if for those of you who don't know what seed cycling is, we get into it in the interview, but it's a really fascinating kind of Eastern practice on how to naturally regulate our cycles through the consumption of different seeds across different parts of our hormonal cycle. And so getting to speak with Dr. Uli and Terry on the podcast was really a pleasure. Learning about the origin story behind Two Moons, really uncovering how loneliness can be very omnipresent for women, particularly who are navigating their own health challenges. And we also talk a little bit about some of the innovation around women's health and how do we think about that in the context of shaping the future of the workforce to support our health and our cycles. Lots of really interesting discussion in this interview. I'm really excited for you all to take a listen, to dive in. If you also want to try out the product, I have a discount code endorphins that's running from December 12th through January 12th of 2026. That gives you $40 off of your first purchase, either for a subscription or a one-time use. So use the code endorphins if you want to get that nice discount. And before we dive in, reminder to hit a like, follow, rate, review, all the things on the podcast. All right, let's get into it. Thank you so much for coming on to Everyday Endorphins. It is so wonderful having the two of you here today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you so much for having us.
I am so excited to dive into such a rich discussion on everything that the two of you have built, are building, and talking about some of the misconceptions around women's health and better understanding how our hormones actually impact our happiness and our well-being. I'm personally very interested in this. I know, Terry, we've spoken a lot about how I've had experiences with trying to balance my hormones naturally and navigating the world of PCOS. And so that's really what I do love about your product is helping to kind of raise awareness and better educate people on how to really regulate their hormones in a more natural and healthier way. Everything that you guys are doing personally resonates with me. And I'd really love to start there and have the two of you share a little bit more about the origin story and moment of inspiration that really sparked the desire to create Two Moons. I know you have very diverse backgrounds from neuroscience to law to business. So tell us a little bit about your stories coming together and starting to create Two Moons.
Yeah, it's a great story. We actually met 17 years ago at a music class at Juilliard, an evening division class, when we were young professionals. And this was sort of our, a hobby that we're both very passionate about. We're amateur pianists and we both played since we were 4 years old. And we were in this class for 5 years and we became good friends along with a whole group of us that were enrolled in this class. And about 2 years ago, I held this, what's an annual ritual in my living room, which is a clothing swap among some of our women friends, where we discard and trade clothing that we've tired of, but would look good on one of our other friends. During this clothing swap on the Upper West Side, we opened up about our hormonal health. And I shared about how I've struggled with my cycle for basically since puberty. I said, I didn't really like the traditional remedies of pharmaceutical remedies of hormonal birth control or antidepressants, what's usually prescribed for difficult cases of PMS. And I asked Ulrika, who's a doctor, if she knew of anything that was more holistic. And she mentioned that she had seed cycled for years. She grew up in a household where her father's an OBGYN, and she grew up in a different country in Europe where they're more attuned to holistic methods. And she explained what was seed cycling, and she can go into it more later. And I said, that's wonderful, but these seeds are it's all very complicated, combining all these different seeds in a different order. And I'm not very culinarily gifted as it is. I said, can't we make it easier? Can't we modernize this for women? And that night we vowed that we should make a more modern solution that is accessible and simple for busy women with professional lives. or busy women who are busy running households. And at first, we thought we would make a snack bar, one for each half of the cycle, combining the seeds in each half of the cycle. But then we did a marketing survey and no women wanted to eat more sugar. The snack bar was the least popular option. We asked them if they would like it in a butter, in a, what was it, like a snack bite, snack bar, a gummy capsule, and the capsule won out. And so we decided to make a company and bring this product to life.
And the rest was history. Well, now
Yep.
I'm thinking about this nut butter thing because it's seed cycling. It's a combination of different types of seeds. So would it have been like a specific nut butter for the first half of your cycle and then a different type of butter for the second half, like a spread? Or I'm just like, now I'm curious what that could have looked like if that's what you guys ended up going down. I mean, I guess that's maybe logistically a bit harder for the consumer to think about, oh, I'm going to use this one product that might taste different than the other one at different parts of my cycle. And kind of to your point, I mean, it makes sense that the consumer research was lining up with, I think, just like how consumer behavior goes. When we want to make a change, it needs to be super, super easy to implement, right? And so in my mind, the idea of just taking a capsule once a day is so much easier. There's less of like that barrier to actually make the behavior change. And I've been using your product and it's fabulous and it's easy for, I mean, I have it on my desk and I know like, okay, my morning routine, I'm going to take it. So it's just easy to habit stack when it's like a pill or a capsule is what I found to be true. I'd love to hear from you a little bit more about seed cycling. What is seed cycling? Maybe someone's tuning in right now who doesn't really have any significant challenges with their cycle, which if that's the case, that's fantastic. I wish I could say the same. And maybe they don't really know what seed cycling is, right? So I'd love to hear from you about like what is this? What is the science that is supporting seed cycling and how is seed cycling meant to regulate our hormones?
Good question. So essentially, it has been practiced for quite some time. The name itself for the cycling is probably not that old yet. However, it has probably been used in Ayurvedic medicine for a long time. And it essentially is the use of two different seeds during each half of the menstrual cycle. So flaxseed and pumpkin seed during the first half, with the thought to balance out and help a little bit with estrogen production. And then sunflower and sesame seeds during the second half to gently assist progesterone. And the thought behind this is that these seeds, particularly the flax seed and the sesame seed, they have lignans in there. The flax seeds, they have phytoestrogens. So that is a mimic of somewhat of the estrogen that we produce. I mean, there are different estrogen types, and that can have like a subtle effect on some of the estrogen receptors. Moreover, it can help actually with gut health and clearing out too much estrogen, for example, as it has fibers in there. And then aside from these lignans, there are also other compounds such as omega-3 in there, as well as certain electrolytes such as magnesium, manganese, selenium, vitamin E, so also vitamins. And this can be quite helpful in the different symptoms that people can experience with the different parts of their cycle. And not everybody might have PMS symptoms. On the other hand, it's quite interesting how many women can have even subtle symptoms. They can be anything from some breast tenderness to subtle sleep changes to subtle word finding difficulties to pain, cramps, bloating. And so it is thought that these combination essentially can help with magnesium for headache, for example, or the lignans again with the estrogen or the fibers with the digestion. And so what we did is we added to the second half, to the luteal phase part, so the sesame and sunflower, we added chasteberry, which is an ancient herb that has been used for a long, long time in Europe actually for women's health, and it's a well-known remedy and it helps very well with PMS. And then we added a little bit of psyllium just to aid a little bit with digestion. So there have been studies on the individual seeds and what their ingredients are and how helpful they are. And then there are a few that are now coming out. For example, seed cycling has been evaluated now for PCOS and has been found to be helpful. And then there are many studies actually for chasteberry itself. And there are quite significant findings. There's one from last year that showed that women really had much less pain, much less breast pain after taking the chasteberry berry for a couple months. And we did a little clinical study as well and enrolled 40 women through a independent third-party citrus lab is the name. And we had really great results about like between like around 76% of women actually had less period-related pain. And then a lot of women had actually, the majority of women had better sleep, better mood, better skin. And the vast majority really wanted to continue the product. That was 87%. And that was really beautiful and very humbling to see that we also have objective data to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really interesting also just to think about like the premise of seeds being so instrumental in helping to regulate our cycles and how different seeds impact you at different points in your cycle, like the flax versus pumpkin versus sesame, right? And sunflower. And it's so simple. Like, I think maybe especially in America and Western medicine, like we overcomplicate health. But these are just like, these are seeds that are very accessible to people that clearly are very nutrient dense. And I feel like so much of health is actually just so basic, comes back really to the fundamentals. And I do feel like the philosophy of seed cycling really aligns with that as well, because it's kind of showing to us that we can kind of self-regulate just by proper nutrition, even like eating more locally or seasonally, like learning how to kind of attune our bodies to the seasons, right? And it feels like there's that similar line of logic when it comes to just thinking about different seeds that are better for our bodies at different parts of our cycle and how that affects not only our cycle, but our mood and so many other factors as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think good food is medicine. Unhealthy food is probably not at all. And
Mhm.
it's actually about chemistry level. If you look at certain foods, I mean, from polyphenols to electrolytes to fibers to omegas. I mean, there's so many different things that are in various like nutritious aspects that are very simple actually. They can be so beneficial on a very like biochemistry cellular level. And it's really great what one can do. And less is more probably in many cases.
Yeah, I think that's a good like fundamental philosophy in life. Less is more. And I know you had just kind of talked a lot about specifically looking at estrogen and progesterone, right? Estrogen kind of top of mind for the first half of our cycle, and then progesterone is more for the second half. Where does testosterone come into play? Because when I think about PCOS, obviously it's this imbalance in sex hormones, but also kind of like maybe an overrepresentation of testosterone in the body. And I'm curious to hear a little bit more about how seed cycling plays even a role potentially with testosterone, if it does at all.
I'm not sure if someone has looked into that, but probably as all hormones are more balanced. And the interesting thing is most hormones or sex hormones are derived from the same origin. They all come from a cholesterol ring. So we need good fats to a certain degree, like healthy fats. And they actually all undergo certain transformations to become estrogen, to become progesterone, to become testosterone. And testosterone is also part of this entire pathway. And if there are imbalances, it can be too much of one. I mean, there's also, maybe people have heard in perimenopause, there can be like an estrogen dominance, or it's very interesting how certain hormones can be too much in certain stages as well. And as there is probably an imbalance of the other hormones, there can be an abundance of this testosterone. And it probably also plays a role in clearance of these hormones and also how the pituitary ovary axis and pituitary like other axis like thyroid and adrenal axis is working. If there's too much stress, if the thyroid is not working well, this all can have an overall impact on regulated hormonal balance, including the testosterone. And it's a good question, as we do have now actually 2 studies on PCOS that show that there is a benefit with seed cycling. There is probably an indirect effect on the testosterone as well.
It's interesting. I mean, I think a lot about this too, just for myself. And I know that, for example, I think it's spearmint is a good thing to have to help lower testosterone, or it helps block androgens, or, and like, I need to be fact checked. I really need to be fact checked because I haven't really looked into this in a while, but I'm pretty sure it's like spearmint or peppermint that helps at least with the testosterone. So I was curious if maybe seed cycling had any sort of relationship, but it sounds like it's really more focused on like the estrogen and progesterone, right? Those specific hormones.
Yes, you're absolutely right with the spearmint.
Okay, good. It's like I have my facts in order.
And I do think it is probably really more an indirect one with the balance, that you don't have that really properly production of progesterone and estrogen can happen, and not so much falls into the testosterone pathway, that one is essentially produced in excess, and the others can really raise in a good way, and everything can be cleared in a healthy way. But let me see. I don't know if a mechanism where spearmint and the seeds would do exactly the same, but I need to look this up.
Yeah. Well,
It's true. Spearmint, I've recommended it to a few people, actually, to a few patients.
yeah, we'll circle back in a part 2 and then discuss that. I'm going to shift gears a little. Terry, I would love to kind of hear from you and your perspective on, just something I think a lot about is how I think women's health is just so underrepresented right now. And I'm now, well, underrepresented in general, right? But I think now there is more of an effort to gain more awareness towards women's health. Like there's more companies and brands where the mission is to really like find solutions to a lot of these issues that a lot of women struggle with around hormonal imbalances and whatnot. And I think about, someone like myself who has PCOS and has struggled with this for some time. I feel like I still don't even have a solid understanding of the menstrual cycle. And I'm 26. Like I should know this. But I also know that there's a lot of women out there that just don't really have the knowledge about their own. So, Terry, like, have you encountered this with a lot of the women that you guys were running studies with, or just when you were even like doing research into starting this company? What were you seeing around the general like baseline knowledge of women's health out there? Because I can't be the only one that like is still asking about the different phases of my cycle, and I'm 26 and well educated. I just, I think there's a lot of women that are struggling with this.
I mean, I think women for a long time have had their pain normalized. So society has taught women to complain less, to endure more. And there's a lot of issues around stigma and taboos around discussing menstruation, discussing other aspects of women's health, their gynecological and sexual health. And as a result, the knowledge is very siloed. So if you have a condition, you're very aware of your own condition, but you might not be aware of what all your sisters out there might be experiencing, right? A much higher percentage than I realized of people have PCOS or endometriosis or PMDD, and they might be aware of their own conditions, but have no idea what the symptoms of these other conditions are because we're not taught in either high school or college. If you go to medical school, then yes, you'll learn. But if you're not a doctor and you don't have the condition, then it's just this kind of black hole, right? This unknown area where people are ignorant and they don't even know that they're ignorant about it. And so what can we do to change this? Well, we've been doing campus events at some of the top US business schools where we gather women together with a wellness event, which is the thing that kind of attracts them to participate, whether it's a sound bath or yoga class or bar class. And then we have a discussion about hormonal health and then sort of an open networking discussion session afterwards. And we also talk about cyclical work and leadership. But what we're trying to do is to create spaces where people feel comfortable sharing with each other, because I feel like it's a double whammy with women's health, where women are taught to endure their conditions, but then they also are forbidden to speak about it. So there is the condition itself, so the pain of the condition, and then there's a loneliness of living with your condition by yourself and not feeling like you can express yourself openly. And so we want to change all that by creating these little pockets of discussion. And also with our website, we have a blog where there are educational articles. We've written ones about, we've had people write ones about PCOS, for instance, but other common conditions and questions that women might have. That's along with selling a product. We have the capsule, but it's larger than the capsule. It's also about the conversation that can be inspired by the capsule. And for us, it's a twofold mission.
Take the capsule, stay for the conversation. I love it. But it's true. I mean, I love that you bring up this piece around loneliness, because I know we've talked about this separately, and how in my own experience, when I got the diagnosis, I didn't even really understand what it was. I kind of held on to some shame for a while around having PCOS just because I was like, what does this mean that I have an imbalance in my sex hormones? Like, what does this actually look like manifesting outwardly? Or how is this actually going to impact me in my day to day? Because all of these, all the blood work that you're doing, the stuff that's in your body, the hormones, the neurotransmitters, everything, you can't see that, right? It's just like numbers on a page when you're running these tests. And for so long, I was like, how do I deal with this condition? Like, why I don't even want to call it a condition. It feels like there's something wrong with me. And as time has passed and I've talked more about it and I've met women who've been like, yeah, I also have this. And there's also, I think, this misconception that like every woman who has PCOS is super obese and like it doesn't really, not everyone like has the same symptoms and whatnot. And even around like having cysts on your ovaries, like not every woman experiences that either. So there is this like silent loneliness, I think, with just any sort of hormonal health challenge. And I personally don't know much about endometriosis, to your point, how if you have a condition, you're kind of siloed in only the knowledge of that one condition. But now it feels like online I'm seeing so many women talking about endometriosis and the struggles that they're experiencing. Have you found seed cycling to be something helpful for women who have that condition as well?
We know a little bit less. I'll let Uli, the doctor, respond to that. But I will just say that so far we had one customer review from somebody who had endometriosis, and she noted a decrease in premenstrual pain, but no decrease in her menstrual pain. So that's all I know. But I'll let the doctor weigh in on the medical side.
No, thank you for that commentary. And this is indeed something where we do need more knowledge. I mean, as you said, there is not much knowledge on PCOS, and you're right. There's a certain teaching that happens in medical school, but everybody is so different, and there's probably a wide variety of different presentations and how someone feels, how someone presents. And this is the same with the treatment. As we don't know so much about it yet, we don't have a good handle on what the results are good. We know that certain aspects work. If we suppress a period, for example, then there can be some benefit on endometriosis presentation. But with seed cycling, there have been a few anecdotal evidences that it might help. And so the thought is that the seed cycling itself might help. And in our case, actually, the chasteberry might have a beneficial effect as well. On the other hand, there have been some anecdotal reports as well that the seed cycling might have intensified a little bit of symptoms, or that endometriosis might have been a little bit more severe. That is the vast minority. And it all depends a little bit on the baseline hormones as they are. What is the LH? What's the FSH level? And then because chasteberry, again, works on the pituitary ovary axis. And for some, this attenuation might be very beneficial, but for others, it might maybe temporarily worsen things. But it's very interesting. I have heard of voices who say like, oh, how great would it be to really research seed cycling in either PCOS or endometriosis a little bit further to understand it better. Same for chasteberry, to also get a little bit of a better handle. But again, it might work for some, might not work for others.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it sounds like there's still so much emerging research that's happening right now too. And clearly there's more to uncover and to discuss and have really like a rich discourse on when it comes to women's health and seed cycling and our hormonal balances. But when we do think about just any sort of like fluctuation in our hormones and the desire to come back to like a homeostasis, a balanced state, when we think about seed cycling as a mechanism to help balance our hormones and get us into that equilibrium state, how does this idea of like syncing your cycle change the way that you relate to stress and anxiety and emotional fluctuations? Because we know that our sex hormones can definitely impact our mood, but let's talk a little bit about why it's actually so important to get a grip on your hormonal health because of the way that it relates to our mental health.
Very good question. So what does one regulate first? So is regulating the stress and the anxiety actually having the impact on the period, or vice versa? Or again, both is like feeding into each other? And I like to think about a few things in that regards. First of all, it is important to know about all this. And Terry, I thought about this. It's a really good point. We actually learn certain things in medical school, but then we don't on the other hand. And then you sometimes read about something and you know about an organ system, or you know about a presentation, but then you see it in more variety, or you see it in more depth, and then you understand it so much better, or you experience it yourself. And you have never seen this actually in that depth, even in medical school. And so in terms of the stress, for example, what I mentioned earlier, it is so interesting how this cholesterol actually goes into these different pathways. There are different enzymes that actually break them up and create like different forms of these hormones. And again, there are different forms of estrogen, but also what is formed out of this one. And that is something that I really like to say a lot is cortisol, our stress hormone. So there's a thought behind this, that if someone is stressed a lot, there's of course a lot of cortisol production. And that is an interesting one because there is somewhat of a circadian rhythm to it. If you produce cortisol in a certain fashion, there's actually mostly production in the morning, and it's produced by our adrenal glands. And somehow we can burn this system a little bit out, that there's not as much cortisol production. And of course, if there's a lot of cortisol production, it is at the expense of the other hormones. And so that is very important, where somewhat of a stress regulation can be very important to make sure that the other hormones are produced. Breathing exercises, walking, doing an acupuncture, doing ear seats or ear pressure points, maybe tapping or humming, things that can really activate the parasympathetic nervous system and calm down are very helpful. The other thing is knowing about the cycle and being aware of that is very important to what happens actually to the body and brain itself. And here briefly talking about the brain reshapes actually throughout each month. And if you are throughout the follicular phase, it actually shapes very much areas that are involved in decision making and being very positive, being very outgoing. And this then changes in the luteal phase, where there is actually a pathway that involves the frontal brain and part of the striatal pathways actually, and also involves the amygdala, where the progesterone can make people quite calm. But on the other hand, if people are a little bit more sensitive to it, they can be more anxious and irritable. So I think this is also very important to know that this can be a little bit cycle related. And I think being aware of the cycle and being aware of certain changes allows you to know that and have some power and not feel guilty about it if you respect that, or you don't feel like overwhelmed if it happens, because you have awareness of that. And I think this is something that we need to integrate more and more. I mean, not everybody, of course, can do cyclical work right now, but I think we will have more awareness in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a really beautiful reflection, because I think when it comes to our health, if we feel powerless against that, it's really hard to take even very small steps to feeling healthier. Like if you feel like your body is working against you, or if you just don't even have the awareness, it's like very easy to feel powerless. And I totally agree with you. It's like once you have the awareness and just the understanding of what's happening, that actually gives you some more control and agency over the decisions that you make to support your health and well-being. And I think this is actually a really great segue into coming back to what you mentioned earlier, Terry, around some of the workshops and lectures and events that you've hosted at university campuses. A topic that really caught my attention when looking at your page and your blog was some of the research that you shared around cyclical work. I've never heard of this before. Like, the way I think about it is your chronotype, if you're like a morning or evening person, and how you should structure work depending on how your energy is naturally. But obviously, cyclical work is more tailored to when we think about women's health and our cycles. So tell me about this concept. What does it mean? How do you define it? If someone, hears the term cyclical work, like what should they be thinking about?
This is a great question. So cyclical work is the idea that women's productivity has a rhythm. And it's not because we're inconsistent, but because our biology follows a 28-day arc, right? And so modern workplaces are attuned to circadian rhythm, the 24-hour cycle, of which both men and women follow the circadian rhythm. But in addition, women have this infradian rhythm of the 28 days. Cyclical work is simply working with your body's natural timing instead of forcing yourself into somebody else's linear tempo, right? So with chronobiology, as you mentioned, a lot of workplaces already respect the fact that some people are morning larks and other people are night owls, and they can start and stop their workday with some flexibility in accordance to their natural chronotype. Now, what I'd love to see in the future, so we're kind of futurists, is some sort of respect or acknowledgement that half of the workplace also runs on a 28-day cycle along with this 24-hour clock. When, Henry Ford instituted the 40-hour work week, 5-day work week back in the 20s, almost a century ago, women made up 1 out of 5 workers, right? And now we're half. And so at the time, there wasn't really a thought about the 28-day cycle in the way that workplaces were designed. But now, and I'm not the only one who's thinking this way, women all over the world are realizing that work rhythms need to be modernized. And so on our blog, I published an essay about the future of cyclical work, but this will be followed by other essays by women around the world who are movement leaders, advocates, community builders that independently in their own countries are doing this work and proposing a new theory about how we can evolve the modern workplace to take into account all the participants. And so I feel very passionate about this, and I was really excited to discover these women around the world who were thinking the same thing. I actually inputted my essay before I published it on the blog into ChatGPT, and I said, who else is thinking like this? And it scraped the internet and it found people's writings published on small blogs, on LinkedIn posts, and I wrote to some of them. And I just think it's incredible. I think that there's a groundswell in this awareness, and maybe it happened because we went through the pandemic where all of a sudden the whole structure of the workplace was collapsed and we were all working remotely. And this gave people time to think, and also gave them a bit more flexibility. And I think this is also why women all around the world maybe started thinking this around the same time. And I am so excited to be bringing these voices together because, it's time for a change.
That's talk about real innovation right there. It's like, how do we design the workforce for women, right? In a way that it just was never really accounted for previously. What do you think this actually looks like in practice? If you actually were to imagine a world where the workforce was tailored to this knowing around our 28-day cycle in conjunction with the 24-hour day, what could this look like in practice in the workforce? Like, what are small changes that organizations could make to kind of set their female employees up for success and honor that we do have this internal rhythm in our bodies?
Yeah. I mean, I always say it's not about doing less. It's about doing in the right rhythm. You can do all the things, but perhaps it's, you could think about timelines being more on a monthly basis, allowing people more flexibility in putting overtime in certain weeks and then also less time in other weeks, so for instance, I like to do different types of work during different weeks. So the follicular phase is when we're the most extroverted, right? This is great for pitch meetings, for cocktail parties, or it's great for creativity, for ideation and strategy. And then for the ovulatory phase, you're articulate, you're magnetic, you're outward facing, also good for pitches, good for interviews, presentations, networking. And then the luteal phase, this is when you kind of look a little bit inward. And so it's good for recalibration, right? For operations, for editing, for, completing projects. And then in the menstrual phase, I find myself to be the most clear during the menstrual phase, in fact. And so I love to write, I love to write and to strategize during the menstrual phase. And it's good for long-term planning, evaluating decisions. And I think just for women to have this knowledge, but also for workplaces to understand that women are going through this every single month. And so giving people more autonomy, perhaps around both the length of their working hours and also what sort of tasks they're focused on during that time. I think it was interesting. One of the women who will be writing an essay for our blog, she mentioned to me that artists and entrepreneurs actually are very suited to cyclical work because built into their professions is a lot of flexibility. So they can fully embody it, perhaps without organizational constraints, but perhaps organizations can look at how artists and entrepreneurs act and adjust to maximize the productivity of all of their workers. And also not just the productivity, but the creativity and the joy and overall well-being and satisfaction with their workplaces. And it's also interesting, athletes have known all of this for a long time, right? So I cite in my blog article that women in England that are on the Premier League football team, soccer, they've been training in accordance to their cycle for years now. And their coach says that there's less injuries, that they play better, basically, because they have an understanding of when is the best time to push and when is the best time to preserve. So I think any employer, if they're not aware of cycles, it would be helpful for them to receive education around it, and for the workers themselves, and for more empathetic, humane, and just effective workplaces with higher retention. We know that when we were researching, or we did our third party clinical study on the capsule, we were very curious about sick days, right? And so we found that in the 2 cycles of taking our capsule, that there was a 74% reduction in sick days after 2 cycles, the period related sick days specifically. But that also reemphasized to us how much women deserve to have some support for this, right? And this should be something that is supported by society. If there are small adjustments, and our product might be one example of this, but there are probably other ways to support women within their cycles as well. And just for it to be something that is, normal to talk about. It's like when we're say, go get your flu shot, right? Like this is not, it's not an icky or disgusting subject. It is just biology. It's just reality. And it's a reality that half the world lives.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a lot that I want to reflect on from what you just shared. And really what I was hearing was, how do we infuse education and resources into organizations? How do we create structures of more autonomy for employees to have more freedom with how they structure their work as a way an artist or an entrepreneur would? But I think that also comes back to how do these companies create more trust within their organizations? Because if you don't have a foundation of trust within your team, how do you let your employees work more autonomously? There needs to be a way to boost that trust layer, I think. I mean, I found that to be so critical in the way that I operate in teams in my job, and the way that I, help to shape teams too, is how do we create cultures of trust and psychological safety, which is very important. So there's even that organizational behavior lens that we can apply to this, which I think is fascinating. And I'm sure is very well received at all these business school campuses that you're going to. Well, as we wrap up the interview, Uli and Terry, I have just a few final questions for you. The first one is, what is something that you wish every woman knew about her cycle that just most of us weren't taught?
I think there are several things. I'm not sure women know exactly what their cycle is actually. I think a little bit more these days, but I think because of Instagram, internet, etc. But I think this is a more recent achievement, and still a lot of people have no idea when they actually could get pregnant, what ovulation means and what their pregnancy window is. I think that would be a very helpful one, where people could actually embrace or avoid certain things in a more natural way. And also knowing about the different parts of hormones. What is there? What do they mean?
That's a good answer. It's even as simple as understanding your cycle so that you can avoid pregnancy too, if you're not looking to get pregnant, right? I think that could cause a lot of less stress in a lot of relationships and not relationships. So yeah, love that reflection. Thank you.
I would like for women to view it not as a negative thing, because we've been socialized to think, oh, it's not my period again. But to think of it as it's almost like the seasons of the year. Like, you don't hate the winter or the spring or the summer or the fall. It's just all different. And it's what makes us variable and interesting and creative and women. And so I think kind of appreciating the upsides of it. I feel amazing during my follicular and ovulatory phases. And people rarely talk about the amazing parts of your cycle or the creatively inspiring parts of one cycle. And I think if we start to view it differently, we are in a different type of relationship with our bodies. We're not at war with our own bodies. Rather, we are appreciating all of its fluctuations. And I think just a mindset shift would be great.
I love that. I've been thinking a lot about what does it mean to live seasonally, but also to embrace every season of life too, and to not put these labels on something is good or it's bad, but to recognize things for what they are. But that's great because things will inevitably change and shift. And so can you find joy in the other season that's going to come? I just posted a story on Instagram. It was a selfie of me in my jacket and a scarf and just kind of transitioning to the colder weather here in New York. And I wrote a caption saying that I used to hate winter but now I'm finding joy in the bundle. And it's like, yeah, if you live in a place where there's 4 seasons, winter is going to come. And why waste those 3 to 4 months hating those months just because it's winter? Like, there's still ways to find joy, even in a season that maybe isn't your favorite, right? So that logic and line of reasoning is kind of what is coming up for me. And I love it as far as how we think about mindset shifts, specifically like for our cycle and just the way that our bodies change. Our bodies are always changing, right? So learning to kind of like lean into that, I think, is really important. Well, that actually kind of brings me to the last few questions that I'd love to ask the two of you. So the first question that I have is for the two of you to just share your perspective on happiness. How do you define happiness? Has that definition evolved over time? And if so, what would you say now is your definition of what it means to be happy?
I think I used to think of happiness as a destination, very results oriented person. But now I think it's more about feeling the flow when you're within the process. We're all energy. And I think it's also alignment. So happiness is when you feel aligned within your body and your mind and your purpose, and everything lines up and there's a harmony there. And it's like you say, it's every season has something that brings joy. Like, the winter has ice skating and hot chocolate, and just learning to be grateful for that, and also creating something new. I think embarking on this startup with my best friend has been a very joyous experience, which is not to say there are not ups and downs in startup life. Of course there are, but it is such a privilege to be able to make something that is your own and to bring new thoughts into the world and to explain your perspective and to encourage the world to consider a different perspective. That is an incredible privilege.
I want you to say something very similar that the that the path is in a lot of ways the goal, and that one does not have to run for certain goals or certain achievements, but just really enjoy the way there, because it's hour by hour, step by step. I mean, this is what we can control in terms of time frame and really foresee what can I do within a day. Who knows what tomorrow is? And it is really also, I think, the of the feeling of being content and balanced, because that is a very good baseline sensation. And sometimes there is moments of like overflowing happiness, but having this contentness and balance is, I think, something that I'm very thankful for and I appreciate more and more. And it's a good state.
Yeah, contentment. That's spot on. The final question that I have for the both of you, which you maybe kind of answered a little bit in this previous one, but on a more day-to-day basis, what is something that just brings you endorphins every day? What's something that sparks your joy? Is it a practice, a ritual, a habit, a thing, a person, a puppy? What's that one thing that brings you a bit of endorphins every day?
Well, my puppy Byron, of course, and then also 2 moons. The capsules definitely they work. But just before this podcast, I actually went for a lap swim, and then I sat in the sauna for a bit. And I have to say, sort of meditative sports like swimming, Pilates, yoga, gentle rhythms that really help to settle me.
I
And I've
love
also
it.
picked up meditation since we've embarked in our wellness venture, and it's daily, and I think even 10 minutes makes a big difference.
Totally. You're better than me. This is a reminder that I got to get on my meditation routine, but I love it.
I think it's also the small moments of life that just come and you appreciate them and you're just thankful that they are there. Or a little moment that you have just accomplished where you're like, ah, this happened now. Just pause for a second and let it go in and let it flow through you in this shower of electricity coming through you. There are many things. It can be a sound, it can be a bird, it can be sun. It sounds so cliche, but it really is. Sometimes so much in a grinder, and there can be these moments, or a lovely patient encounter. So thankful for that, or a lovely conversation or a message from a friend or family member, or just being able to go through the day. And sometimes just waking up and saying like, I can move everything. I can breathe. I'm there. Like, how thankful and how happy is this as a state? Yeah. And of course, also moments that come with Terry into the startup. And there are a lot of things to be just really happy about it. Yeah, I have my little rituals, and it's also nice to just go through them and have done them.
Absolutely. I think for me, like having a nice morning routine and getting in movement, and like this morning I made coffee and it felt really good. I was like, okay, this is something I can do for myself before the day is going to get crazy and like I can feel grounded in this moment. So coming back to those consistent practices, I think are so important, right? And, I just really loved getting to talk to the both of you. This has been very eye opening for me. And I'm sure many of my listeners out there who are tuning in. I know we have a discount code, which I'll share in the show notes, and I'll hook everyone up with that. And we'll make sure to, of course, hyperlink where people can find Two Moons so they can try out your product, get connected to the both of you. So all of that will be in the actual show description. So everyone, you can go there to find more information. But again, Uli, Terry, thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful.
Thank you, Stella.
Thank you very much.